Is there plastic in your brain? It sounds like the start of a bad joke, but it's not funny at all. Scientists have found plastics in the brains of humans for the first time. A new study has revealed that the human brain accumulates plastic particles and fibers. In this episode of C-Show News, we're going to talk about what these plastics are doing inside our brains. But first, if you love science news delivered straight to you, hit subscribe so you never miss an update. The plastic that we use every day is designed to last forever, which is great for a plastic bag that holds your groceries or a water bottle that you take hiking. But it's terrible for the environment because it means that plastic waste hangs around for hundreds of years after we're done with it. And while we know that plastic pollution accumulates in giant patches in the ocean and in the cells and tissues of animals, we haven't known where it ends up once it enters the body. There's always been a knowledge gap in what happens to plastic particles once they get into the bloodstream. But this new research has found that microplastic particles can make their way from the blood into the brain and accumulate there. The study was published in the journal PNAS on January 24, 2023, and the authors are from several institutions in the United States and Europe, including the University of California, San Diego, and the University of Hull. They collected tissue samples from 19 individuals who had donated their brains to science after they died. Time of death, and none of them had any known neurological diseases. Using a combination of chemical and imaging techniques, the researchers analyzed these brain samples to see if they could find any plastics in them. Each sample contained between 1 and 100 particles per gram of brain tissue, with an average of 15 particles per gram. And most of those particles were less than 2 microns wide. To put that size into context, a sheet of paper is roughly 100,000 times wider than that, which is used to make things like bulletproof vests and aerospace components. But the researchers point out that the plastic that we use every day contains so it's likely that the plastic particles that they identified were just a small sampling of all the plastics present in the brain tissue. The researchers also found plastic fibers in 16 of the 19 samples, which is 84% of them. The fibers were between 1 and 100 nanometers wide and made primarily of cellulose and nylon. Those are materials used to make things like clothing and ropes, socks and underwear. Since people generally spend more time near their bodies than they do in contact with other plastic products, there are lots of unanswered questions about what these plastics. But this study does give us some clues. For one thing, the researchers think that the plastic particles were. That makes sense since the brain is wrapped in blood vessels and needs to receive oxygen and nutrients from the bloodstream. Some plastic particles may be small enough to squeeze between the cells that line the blood vessels in the brain. Or the particles could be taken up by immune cells in the blood and then travel to the lymph nodes before making their way to the brain. But they do point out that plastics are killing many sea creatures, so it's possible that they could affect our health too. One concern is that plastics could lead to dementia. The buildup of toxic proteins in the brain is thought to be, and in this study, the researchers found that the brains with the highest concentration of plastic particles also had the highest concentration of amyloid beta protein, which is a major component of the plaques associated with Alzheimer's disease. Another concern is that plastic particles could cause inflammation in the brain. In a 2022 study published in Environmental Science and Technology, researchers found that polystyrene particles accumulated in the brains of mice and caused microglial activation, meaning that the mice brain's immune cells started to attack the particles. While that's a good thing since you want your immune, this response can also cause inflammation. At the end of the day, we don't really know what the consequences of having plastic particles in our brains will be, if any. But the fact that we've been putting plastic particles into them to learn more about what's happening, especially in light of the fact that billions of people rely on plastic water bottles for drinking water. Now you may be wondering how you can avoid having plastic particles in your brain. Well, the authors of this study didn't really focus on solutions. The most obvious step is to stop using single-use plastics. These are the plastics that are used once and then thrown away, like grocery bags and plastic cutlery. If you use reusable bags and water bottles, you'll produce less plastic waste overall. You can also try to buy products that are made from recycled plastics and that are labeled as being recyclable. And when you vote with your wallet, you send a message to companies that not all plastics are created equal, and the ones that are more easily recycled should be the ones that are more widely available. And hey, if all this talk about recycling has got you thinking about your carbon footprint, you can take a quiz to find out how C-Show's carbon calculator can help you understand your own impact on the planet and what you can do to reduce it. Thanks for watching this episode of C-Show News. And thanks again to our president for supporting this show. We'll see you next time.